We all love a bit of coffee in the morning to get us awake, focused, help us take on the day. It's super common. It's something that a lot of people think is not healthy for you. Is it actually not healthy? Is it healthy? How much should I have? What does it actually do to my body? If I'm pregnant, can I have it? Can children have it? These are all great questions. And we're talking about this because we had a fantastic question from somebody who's watched a lot of Wellness, and they said, well, I have a great question for you, Dr. Shane. How does caffeine improve cognitive performance if it promotes a vasoconstriction? That means it narrows blood vessels, decreasing blood flow, and we could say also to the brain. So if there was less blood flow to the brain and delivery of oxygen and nutrients, wouldn't that be a bad thing for cognition? You are correct in general about that fact, but major caveat here, that is not how caffeine improves cognitive performance. Caffeine increases neuronal transmission, so it improves nerve signaling in general, activates many parts of the brain at once that maybe typically wouldn't be as active. It increases something called brain entropy, or the brain's ability to better process unpredictable environmental stimuli. So increasing brain entropy and neural transmission, those are the major mechanisms by which caffeine enhances cognitive performance. So that was a great question, I thought, right? Now, other things that improve blood flow to the brain definitely enhance cognition. You could take something like citrulline malate, for example, which is in the nitric oxide pathway. Boost nitric oxide opens up blood vessels, delivery of oxygen and nutrients to the brain. So you can affect cognition positively in many different ways, but that is one way that caffeine does it. Now, before we get into the mechanisms of action and the dosages for all these different demographics, let's talk about a little history of caffeine. So, when the hell did caffeine start? Dating back to 2737 BC, the Chinese were using leaves to make tea. And that's really some of the first recorded evidence of caffeine consumption in the world. Now, in the 9th century in Ethiopia, they started making coffee. So that's where coffee goes back to, in the 800s. And about 1,000 years later, they introduced soft drinks containing caffeine, right, in the 1800s. What country has the highest caffeine intake per capita on average? Actually, Finland. And Finland is extremely healthy and happy and intelligent. So if right there it says caffeine probably is not our enemy in terms of overall health. Granted, you don't have any heart conditions or kidney conditions or any outstanding disease states, medical conditions, right? Caffeine is definitely healthy and beneficial for the average person in terms of burning fat and enhancing cognition. Also has many antioxidants and vitamins and minerals. Does caffeine, high in polyphenols, right? Antioxidants we've talked about, also good for gut health. They're coenzymes in enzymatic reactions, meaning they help these reactions in gut bacteria that break down food that they eat to produce things called short-chain fatty acids that affect cognition and mood and metabolism and all this stuff, right? And immune function, but without getting too deep into that. So that's just to say there is more to coffee than purely the caffeine. But if we're going to focus on caffeine here, let's talk about some quick dosages that you would want to hit or not hit if you're a certain demographic. Children should not have more than 1.3 milligrams per pound. Okay, that's a pretty standard recommendation there. Keep the caffeine intake low in kids, right? If not to prevent them from bouncing off the walls, to prevent any sort of risk for adverse health effects. All right, so that's 1.3 milligrams per pound in children, 130% of their body weight. That is, we don't want to ever really surpass. Okay, when it comes to the average person, how much is a healthy amount of caffeine to have in a day where I won't suffer any adverse health effects, according to, say, the World Health Organization or the FDA? 400 milligrams. That's really the mark that they say. It's super safe if you have 400 milligrams or less, and you're somebody that's healthy, again, doesn't have any heart conditions or anything, that you could have in a day and not worry about anything. All right. Now, remember, there are beneficial health outcomes with people that actually have more cups of coffee in a day, up to about, say, 4 cups, as opposed to those who have 1 or 2. And I think this also is associated with the type of person that has more cups of coffee. They're probably a go-getter. They're probably somebody who's moving around a lot and exercising. They're probably very healthy in other ways. So, you have to realize things like that come with research statistics of that nature. But 400 milligrams or less, that's very safe. How much is in a cup of coffee? really wide ranging, guys. Could be anywhere from 90 to 400 milligrams in a cup, a really strong cup, so 90 to hundreds of milligrams. So, my best advice is either look up the brand that you get and see how much coffee's in there. If you go to Starbucks, say how much caffeine is actually in this size and that size. Every blend is different. Theirs probably has more than, I would say, like Dunkin' Donuts. I'm not advertising for either, but I feel like theirs is pretty potent, at least when I used to have it before I started having Super U. I don't have coffee anymore. But, that's something that I would definitely look into. In terms of pregnant women, now this is really important. So, stay tuned for this. If you know anybody that's pregnant or you are pregnant, research shows, at least previous research, systematic reviews have showed, and this is by the World Health Organization, 300 milligrams or less is safe to not cause adverse health effects or any detrimental effects to the fetus, the developing child, or through childhood if the pregnant woman consumes that per day. That's 300 milligrams or less, not causing any negative health outcomes like low birth weight or things like that, right? They say 300 milligrams or less, you are safe. Now, a more recent review in 2021 showed that any caffeine intake, really, during pregnancy could lead to negative outcomes in the child regarding behavior and cognition. And so if you ask me, I say, and there are other sources that say 200 milligrams or less is safe for a pregnant woman. If you ask me, I would err on the safer side, and I would say, first off, we need to reevaluate what the proper dosage, the safe dosage really is for pregnant women in terms of caffeine consumption. And I would say, until then, until we know exactly, I would just not have caffeine if I were pregnant. And if I were going to have caffeine, would I drink coffee? Probably not. I would have something like tea, like a black tea, a black tea meaning something without added sugar. Well, that's bad for you too, right? Reducing insulin sensitivity and things like that, in the offspring, right? Fake sugar is really bad, but without getting off topic, I would say something like tea probably will have like 30 milligrams of caffeine. That likely negligible if there are sources like WHO that say 300 milligrams or less is safe. So if you really love it and you were going to have it, maybe stick to something like that. But don't have those strong cups of coffee because we just don't know enough about it yet. So what are some of the mechanisms of action with caffeine? What does it do when it enters our body? Let's talk about the pharmacokinetics, meaning, what are the effects that it has on the body in simple. Okay? So when you take in caffeine, 99% of it is rapidly absorbed. Now, it reaches peak concentration within 1 hour, peak blood concentration, and it has a half-life of about 4 to 5 hours on average. And this differs according to the type of caffeine that you have, but that standard caffeine, that's typically what it will be. That means it takes about 4 or 5 hours for half of it to become degraded. So after 4 or 5 hours, you'll have half the levels in your blood that you had when you first had it, right? So it will last you for some time, and this is why I could keep people awake if they have it later in the day. Now, 80% of it is absorbed directly by the brain, as its major mechanism of action is the antagonism or blocking of adenosine receptors. It has a high affinity for adenosine receptors, especially in the brain where most of them are located. And so it binds those instead of adenosine. And what does that mean? Well, if adenosine were to bind those receptors, it will make you tired, right? Adenosine binds them normally in the absence of caffeine, and you get drowsy, you get ready to unwind. But caffeine says, no, we're kicking you out of there, adenosine. We have a higher affinity for these receptors that you guys normally bind. We're going to bind them instead, and we're going to wake them up, right? So they wake up your brain, right? Do these caffeine molecules and, improve neuronal transmission and kick you in. And they raise something called cyclic AMP. Now, increases in cyclic AMP is associated with increased energy in itself and also boosts in fat metabolism. Now, stay tuned if you want to know exactly how much to take to promote fat burning, because we're talking about all the mechanisms of action and then exactly how much is required to promote fat burning and why, right? Now, caffeine has no barriers in the body, nor is it stored in the body. So, in other words, you'll really absorb it all over the place. But again, 80% in the brain directly. Now, you will also absorb it in, say, the heart is something that could cause vasoconstriction and the release of catecholamines like dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. And these are things that could increase somebody's blood pressure and heart rate, right? So you get that often if somebody has too much caffeine. Maybe they feel a little bit racy or jittery. But again, the majority does purely affect the brain. And you can take other forms of caffeine that have a slower sustained release that are far less likely, to have an effect like that, like dicaffeine malate or pterostilbene caffeine. I believe caffeine citrate, is something like that as well. They actually give that to infants with sleep apnea, I believe. But, not as naturally of an occurring form is CAF-CIT. I love dicaffeine malate personally. That's what I have in Super U. It's a fantastic feeling and is good for you, right? So it's only 3/4 caffeine, by the way, when you see that. So that means 75% of it's caffeine, 25% is malic acid, an intermediate in the Krebs cycle, a keto acid in the energy cycle or Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle, and energy in the energy powerhouse mitochondria of all of our cells, right? So you combine that with caffeine, it sustains the release of the caffeine, buffers the salts in the caffeine, and makes for a nice smooth feel. Now, regardless of that, we have its rapid absorption. It knows no barriers. Who wouldn't want to have it, right? We'll start there, I guess. So if you're osteoporotic, don't have more than 3 cups in a day. Without knowing any of the science, it does promote calcium release. That's really the reason, but only in really, really high doses. So if you have 3 cups or less in a day, you should be pretty good in terms of that. If you're a healthy person and you have, upwards of even 400 milligrams, maybe you start to get into calcium release. But if you're at that 400 milligram or less mark in a day, you don't really have to worry about that calcium release. So when we talk about the mechanisms of action behind caffeine, we said we have its major mechanism of action, and that is binding those adenosine receptors, block adenosine from binding. It keeps you awake, it increases levels of cyclic AMP, and it gives you energy. Now, another one is antagonism of GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid. That's an inhibitory neurotransmitter or brain chemical, meaning it will kind of slow everything down in the brain and relax you. Other things, that is GABA itself, not caffeine, of course. Remember, it's blocking that from happening. So other things that promote GABA release would be things like magnesium or lemon balm or passion flower or chamomile. These all help you to relax and keep it cool. Now, caffeine is going to do the opposite, but this is really only at high, almost toxic doses. So we're going to kind of throw that one out as well. We're just going to mention all the mechanisms of action that do exist, though, so you guys know exactly what it does. So we have adenosine, we have cyclic AMP, right? Through that, we have inhibition of GABA receptors, we have inhibition of something called phosphodiesterase, and we have increased calcium release. The 2 big ones are the adenosine and inhibition of phosphodiesterase. Phosphodiesterase is something that reverts cyclic AMP back to AMP. And so if you can block that, then we'll keep levels of cyclic AMP higher. And this is one way that it increases levels of energy in the body. And how much does it take to increase the levels of cyclic AMP and block phosphodiesterase so that we promote lipolysis or fat burning, liberation of our glycerol, backbone to the fatty acid, and the free fatty acids that are attached to it, so that we could start eating all that stuff up in the body and burning fat. 1.34 milligrams per pound is the mark. So 134% of your body weight in milligrams of caffeine would be the amount that would really promote fat burning. So that's what we got for you guys. If you're late to the party, have 400 milligrams or less per day. Kids should not have more than 1.3 milligrams per pound. Pregnant women probably shouldn't have any, but there is some research that says 300 milligrams or less in a day is safe. And if you're trying to burn fat, 136% of your body weight in milligrams. Now, why is this also, aside from cyclic AMP, that you will burn fat? Well, when caffeine is broken down, it's broken down into paraxanthine and theobromine, primarily paraxanthine. And paraxanthine also promotes lipolysis, so the breakdown of fat. Right? Now, these are non-toxic compounds, it's broken down to, again, that are not stored in the body. All right, so hope you guys are having a great day, and I hope now you feel a little more confident about drinking your caffeine. You know who should, you know who shouldn't, and you know how much you should probably be having. Who do we got on here? What's up, Bastista Vitaro? How you doing? Mayor, what's going on? Dave. What's up, Ribrianne? DWI. Acumana Mario. Mafi. Robert Paris, I appreciate that. Thank you. T, what's up? Jason, what's going on? Ash, what's up, girl? How you doing? CB. Zathebes. And Robert Paris. Appreciate the love, you guys. As for now. So we got for you, folks. We'll see you tomorrow, baby. Not sure where, not sure when, but we'll see you then. Later, Dave. Beast from the East. Have a great rest of your night. And have a fantastic, fantastic time drinking your coffee now, knowing exactly what it's doing to your body. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.